And I'm going to view speaker. And everything seems to be in order, so I will leave it to you, Nancy.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. I'm sorry I was a little bit late. These presentations always stress me out, although you might not realize that. So, what I'm going to talk about today is a road trip that I did with a group of friends. I think see that some of them are in the audience, so um, they'll probably think they weren't on the same trip as I was, but we'll see what we can do about that. And I'm going to the trip was in Iceland in July of last year, and I'm going to focus on just, in a sense, one part of the trip, and that's the 6 days of the road trip, mostly which were on F roads. There were some other parts of Iceland that I did get to see and visit with some of my friends. But in trying to keep this presentation manageable, I thought I would focus mostly on the road trip part of this. In doing this road trip, we mostly stayed off the ring road, and most tourists who go to Iceland, if they're doing their own driving trips, stay on the ring roads, and there's good reason to do that in some ways, which you'll find out later on in this presentation. But if you get off the ring road, you get away from the tourists. And you see a lot of the geography of the country because you're, in a sense, going behind the scenes. So that's what we did. In terms of where we went, this is not it's an accurate map of Iceland, that's for sure. It's not an accurate map of how we drove Iceland, but it does show you where we went. So we started in Keflavik, which is where the airport is. And the first day we went to Umi Hotel, where we stayed. And you won't really hear about the hotels very much at all, but just giving you a sense of how we traveled. And then you'll see daily routes. And then we went to the Ian Adventure Hotel, and then the Highland Base in Curlingfangle, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce most of these names, I will confess that. And then up here, further north to Brimslode Guest House, and then we came down to this peninsula and stayed at Hotel Boudir. And then finally, now it looks like we took a sea crossing to get back to Reykjavik. We did not do that. So this is just a straight line that the Google map provided. We came in along here somehow. But that gives you, so we were in the western part of the country solely during this trip. So if we look at each of these days, so my plan for this talk is to tell you a little bit about each day, an overview like this, and then some of the sites that we saw during that day. So on the first day, we left fairly early in the morning. Most days, our group, there were four vehicles, I should say that. There were four vehicles. One vehicle had the two leaders in it, Jeffrey and Winslow. The vehicle I was in had a mother and son from Seattle, and a third vehicle just had one person in it. And then a fourth vehicle was a couple from Southern California. So we each kind of managed our own vehicle in whatever way that we wanted to. And we could leave, we would get the route either the evening before or early in the morning with all the different potential stops and the different roads to take and things like that. And we could leave whatever time we wanted to. You had to think about you did need to get to the next hotel. And we could stop as much as we wanted to. And I think it's important to know that on some days there were three, and other days there were four photographers in our particular vehicle, all of us photographers, not professional photographers necessarily. And each of us has our own interest in photography. So it wasn't unusual for someone to say, while the car is moving, I'm getting out now because we've just seen something. One person has seen something they want to photograph. And so the driver would stop. We'd all get out of the car, and none of us were taking photos of the same thing. We, as I said, had our own interests. But anyway, so it was pretty flexible. We stayed in communication with each other as much as we could, and often met up for lunch. Although some days we had to kind of pack our lunches before we left because we're in very remote areas. Okay, so that starts to give you a sense of the trip. So in terms of the drive on the first day, that was mostly paved. Road one here is the ring road. We were on a number of different roads. I didn't do any driving, so my analysis of the driving may not be the same as our driver. His name was Keegan, but so that was a pretty easy to moderate day. It was a long day, but straightforward. And so the driving challenge compared to other days was pretty straightforward. What we saw that day were coastal, whoops, sorry, page up. What we saw that day were coastal lava fields, the Rift Valley, a volcanic crater, some waterfalls, and black sand beaches and sea cliffs. We went about 200 miles, and we were on the road for almost 8 hours. But I will mention that there is a total time, so that's how from start to getting into the hotel, to the next hotel. But there was also the driving time, and the driving time was less than the total time because we were stopping and taking photos all the time. Our average moving speed was 32 miles per hour, and we went from 29 feet to about 419 feet that day. Okay. So one of the first things we did this morning, our driver was particularly interested in shipwrecks, and so we did see a couple of shipwrecks. And this one, you have the name of it up here. It crashed on February 1988. What's interesting when you see these shipwrecks now, which are near Grindavid, which is near Reykjavik, you don't see the water. They're on these lava rocks, and so you do wonder how they got from the sea to this. And so, what it speaks to is that the land changed. It did sink, but all 11 passengers were saved, so that was good news. And then we see this coastal lava field. This was near Grindavik, which is close to Reykjavik, and it is an active volcanic area. And we spent, at the end of the trip, after the road trip was over, a few of us spent a few days traveling around Grindavik, and I'm not going to say very much about that, but there's lava flows all over. There had been a major eruption September of 94, sorry, September of 2024, and mostly the town has been evacuated. And the day that I was to leave, the day before I was to leave Iceland, there was another lava outbreak, and they had in fact evacuated Grindavik. Wasn't at Grindavik. I was by that time at the airport. Had I been like one day sooner, I would have had to evacuate because of the volcanic acid. It didn't really cause any harm, but there was some concern, and there was some concern whether I'd even be able to get home because of ash. But in fact, that all went fine. The next thing, the photo that you're going to see is of the Cariol volcanic crater, and it's roughly 3,000 years old. And unlike many volcanic eruptions, this wasn't formed by a violent eruption, but instead a collapsed magma channel came in, and then the top of the volcano fell inwards. And what you see around it is red volcanic rock that's iron rich, and then there's the lake that's below is groundwater. And so these are just two versions of it. That means two photos of it. The water was beautifully blue, as you can see, and sparkly. And I tried to give a sense of how deep it goes. So you can see in both of these photos, people right here at the top, and that's where we walked around, and they charged you $3 to walk around this, but it was a beautiful experience. One of the next things we did on this trip on this day, on the first day, was to go and visit a plane crash. It was a DC-3, and it was just something interesting to see. I mentioned the shipwrecks. I personally, as some of you know, are really interested in rust things, and so we spent some time just looking at this plane and looking at the rust and trying to figure out. It actually didn't crash right where it is now. It was moved and then made sort of a tourist thing. We also on this day saw Risnavara Beach, which is also known as the Black Sand Beach, and it's famous for its black volcanic sand and the towering rock pillars that you see that are coming out of the North Atlantic Ocean. It's really spectacular to be able to see these kinds of things, but this is something that many people who go to Iceland would see, so this wasn't so much off the beaten track. And then we saw the Dihirele Peninsula, and that included some of these rock formations, this really fantastic lighthouse. One of the things that, I mean, I've traveled a lot, but I can't say I've seen as many lighthouses as I did in Iceland. And I'm not sure that I saw two lighthouses that looked alike. They were all quite different. And then you can see some of the local farmland. So on this day, most of what we're traveling is relatively flat, and you can see long distances. Okay, so that took us to the end of day one. Day two, we started to move into the interior of the western part of Iceland. And so we went from Umi Hotel, which is where we had stayed the first night of the road trip, to the Iron Hotel. So that day, we transitioned from the ring road to some of the F roads. And so I should tell you a little bit about the F roads. So the F-roads, you are legally required to have four-wheel drive vehicles, which we did have. And these are not paved roads. Moreover, sometimes the river crossings, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, sometimes the river crossings are part of the road. And so you may wonder how safe it is, and I mean, different days, different things. And also, the roads open and close. They're closed during the winter for sure, and then they slowly start to open. And so one of the roads that we took a different day, it had just been opened that day, meaning that people were allowed to travel on it. So on these F roads, you'll find river crossings. The surfaces are really rough. It can be long driving hours because you can't drive very fast. I think we saw I remember a comment on one of the roads. It said that the maximum speed was 60 kilometers, and we were texting each other in the different vehicles saying that is really aggressive speed for this particular road. So we noticed that. A lot of technical driving. We had an excellent driver, as I said, in Keegan, and you had to met kind of when you were going to cross these rivers to get to the other side, you really had to kind of figure out what the depth of the river was, and whether your vehicle would make it across the river. The kind of topography we saw that day were black sand plains, moss-covered volcanic cones, the Rhyolite Mountains in Landmannalaugar, crater lakes, and very little vegetation. So that day we went about 222 miles. We were out for 10 hours, almost 11 hours. And we went from about 34 feet to 2,300 feet. So quite a change in what we did that day. So this is one of the waterfalls that we saw, Axelofoss waterfall. There were a number of waterfalls that we saw. The first day, I think, had the most waterfalls that we identified. We didn't sometimes particularly this one waterfall that's kind of famous that everybody goes to, we didn't even get out of our vehicle. There were so many people there, and it was kind of raining, and the waterfalls was sending water, and we didn't want to be in the crowd. So I didn't even end up with well, because I didn't get out of the car. I didn't end up with a photograph of those particular waterfalls that day. Here we see the Landloggers Mountains in the nature reserve there. And these are rhyolite mountains. So they're mineral streaked, and you can see the streaks and reds, greens, ochre, and they're shaped by the geothermal alterations as the land kind of shifts. You get these columns, and again, I mean, it's really interesting to see this kind of landscape. This whole talk will be landscape, as you'll see. These are also in that same nature preserve. And so you've got these green, mossy mountains, and you've got some ice-streaked mountains. As I said, we were there in July, so we were kind of there at the warmest time that it was going to be. I don't think it was ever warmer than about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. Okay. So this is the day two, and we've come to the first river that we have to cross. So in our group, there were 8 of us, but there were only 6 of us, to 3 vehicles together on this day. And the other couple from Southern California had decided that the first day had been kind of challenging, and they just wanted to take the ring road to the hotel that we were staying at. So we get to this river crossing, and you can see that the 3 drivers there are trying to figure out, should we go or should we not go? And meanwhile, there were 3 women on the trip. So the partner of Jeffrey Winslow, he was the leader. And then Keegan and his mom from Seattle. And then Nathan and I were just separate individuals. And so you've got these 3 guys pointing at different parts of the river and the river bank. And the 3 women were off to the side, and we're saying to each other, there is no way we're crossing that. And so there were 2 different conversations going on. One where these guys are trying to map out how it's going to happen, and the 3 passengers essentially are saying, it's not happening. And we're not really talking to each other about this. But finally, the conclusion was this crossing was not going to happen. Though Jeffrey pointed out that at some point we were going to have to cross this river, so we were going to have to kind of pick the place to do it, but that was not the place. And I think because it was our first encounter and we didn't even know how to make these decisions very well, and the water just seemed to be moving so fast that driving into it did not seem like something we wanted to do. So meanwhile, now we're starting to be in the highlands, and so you get to see the mountains and the streaks of snow that are coming in. And let me think about this. Hang on. Okay, sorry. Okay, I couldn't find. I tried to put together. I have a video of the crossing on this one of the crossings on this day, and I could not upload it to my laptop for some reason, and so I will have to describe this to you. So we did later in that day attempt to cross the river, and I apologize for not even having any photos of this, but so the first vehicle, Jeffrey's vehicle, went first. So the guys had kind of looked at the different options and tried to figure out how to get across the river. And meanwhile, I said, because there were 3 vehicles, I had said, I'd like us to be the last vehicle to cross because I wanted to see what was going to happen. And but when the guys were talking, Nathan had a smaller vehicle than we did. We had Jeffrey and Keegan were driving Land Rovers, and Nathan had what's called a Bigster. I don't know anything about cars, so I can't tell you, but I'll tell you some stuff about this in a little bit. So we were trying to decide whether to go, and then it was decided that we would have to be the second car because we wanted to make sure that Nathan could get through with his vehicle, and so we were going to try 2 different ways of approaching this stream. And so Jeffrey went through, crossed fine, although when he got to the landing on the other side, it was really bumpy and the car was really swaying, and the car really sways when you first go into the water as well. So we decided to cross slightly differently in order to see if we could skip some of that bumping. And actually, my experience is that it looks worse watching the vehicle in front of you than being in the vehicle itself. Or at least that was my experience. It always just looked worse than it felt when we actually did it. Okay, so we got across. Jeffrey lost his license plate in the crossing, as I think we did too. And but we recovered our license plates. And so meanwhile, Nathan was standing back watching us, and then he asked which side of the bank he should come up and things like that. Goes, starts, gets about three-quarters of the way through, his car dips, stalls. That's the end of that crossing for him. And at first, Jeffrey thought he had just stopped to take in the scenery or something, but I was pretty aware that it had stalled. And so the guys spent some time trying to restart the car, trying to figure out what to do, trying to push the car out, which they couldn't even budget. And they finally decided to take out the air filter, which was completely sopping wet, and just let it sit and maybe dry. And there was a picnic bench at the other end of the crossing, and we had our lunch with us. So we all just sat there and ate our lunch for, I don't know, 45 minutes or something. And then they went back down and they couldn't get the car started again. So we just left the vehicle in the river. And Nathan joined Jeffrey's car that day, and we've contacted Nathan contacted Hertz. They told him how to contact a towing company. It was extremely expensive to have that towed back to Reykjavik, I'll tell you that. And then we just basically decided that we weren't going to acquire another vehicle. We would just share Nathan in whatever way that we wanted to. And so that's what we did. I will say it did make us slightly more cautious on some upcoming crossings, because now we're down a vehicle, and that's something to think about. Okay, so I told you the vehicle crossing story, and told you about that. And then, so near the end of the day, we came upon. We were just driving to where we were going, and we came across this church. And many churches in Iceland the same way, and often off by themselves. And again, I can't really pronounce the name of this church, but it's a Catholic church that's on the edge of a lake, that's also referred to as Ugly Wolf Lake. And every village in Iceland has at least one church, but this one is particularly unique, and particularly noticeable because the steeple is so much higher than many of the churches that we saw. So the wooden church was built in 1914 on the same spot as the other churches had occupied this same spot, but fell into disuse. And so this was put in 1914, and it's now used some for services and is also used for weddings and other public events. Okay, day three. Um, we're deep in the highlands, and so we're seeing a lot of contrast in the land, and we're going to our next hotel. So on that day, it was a mix of paved roads and multiple F roads, variable surfaces, fewer services. So one of the things that we did have to think about each morning when we set out was, is there going to be some places to stop for lunch? Should we pack up some of our breakfast to have for lunch? What was our gas situation? Where would be the next gas station? So you had to really think this out, unlike, say, being on the ring road where, the services are relatively dispersed. So you still had to be strategic in your navigation. Sorry. Well, oh, I'm sorry. Still had to be strategic in your navigation, and think about it, but there was less river drama this day. I will tell you that we lost count at some point, but on about the third or fourth day, one of the people in our group said that we had crossed about 40 some moving streams. Now, not all of them were deep, but the water was moving. So lots of streams to cross. The topography for that day were interior highland plateaus, glacial rivers, geysers, waterfalls again, geothermal valleys, and as I said, we were going up and up. And so we had come down that the evening before, and then this day we the total distance was 120 miles. We were out for almost 8 hours again. These days were pretty exhausting, I will say. The average moving speed was 19 miles per hour, and we were from 244 feet to 2352 feet is the maximum elevation that we did. So it one of the reasons some of the drive like 120 miles isn't that much in the grand scheme of things. We couldn't drive very fast, but also, as I said, we were often stopping to take photos along the way, and so that really cut into our time. Nobody complained about that. That was perfectly fine. That was part of we. It was a photography trip. So here are some of the things that we saw on day three. You see a lot of these green, mossy cliffs, and so you've got this kind of volcanic stuff, and then the green on it, and you can see the volcanic on the. When I touch my keyboard, that's where things go off. On the ground there on the road. There's the Hufjukal ice cap, and it's the third largest in Iceland and covers the largest active central volcano in the country. And it's between the two largest glaciers of Iceland. And it was pretty impressive to see. Then we went to see the geyser, and so now all of a sudden we're around people. Most of the time we didn't see people. I mean, there might be somebody at the gas station, but there weren't really people on the roads. And most days, the only vehicles that we saw were our own vehicles. There weren't other people trying to do the same kind of trip that we were doing. And so this was a Stroker geyser, and you can't see it all that well, but there's a ton of people here. So we didn't walk too close to it. We stayed back a little bit. We did take photos of it. And on the sort of circle route, people do stop to see this, which is why there were so many people there. So this geyser is active, and it was blowing plumes the whole time we were watching it every 5 to 10 minutes. And as it says here, it can go up to about 20 meters into the air. And I guess it's gone up to as much as 40 meters. And then it's a whole geothermal area. And so you've got fume rolls and steaming vents and bubbling mud pits all going on that people will also go and visit. This was another waterfall, Girafoss, and it marks that we're approaching Curlinger Fall. And so now we're getting higher, and the vegetation is thinning out. And I mean, we're not seeing trees or anything. We're well beyond the tree line at this point. Okay. So day four, we see some volcanoes and the coastline. And we were on some F roads, and that day we were on one that had just reopened, and it was particularly entering it was pretty rough. What I didn't mention to you is I suffer from motion sickness a lot. And so I had my C-bands on, and I was taking ginger and all of those things. And this particular day when we started this road, I just started laughing, and somebody asked me what I was laughing about, and I said, I don't have motion sickness when I think I'm going to die. And that's what I was feeling, because we were going over these boulders and the car's kind of going like this. But we did that for a while. We did eventually end up on some coastal routes near the end of the day. So we had this highland descent. open tundra, some basalt columns, which you'll see, and fishing towns along the way. So this is the second largest ice cap, and it located in the highlands. Okay, this is another river crossing. This one, so Keegan often was the one who measured the river for us by, you might notice that his shorts are wet. He'd walk into the river and we'd get a sense of how high, and he's pretty tall, so that would give us a pretty good sense of how high the water was. And then get a sense, because I mean, you can see some of those rocks are quite visible, but there's rocks other places that aren't visible. So he would walk across and see how it was going, and we were anxious about the. Some of us were anxious. Keegan and Jeffrey wanted to cross. The other four of us weren't saying not over my dead body, but weren't saying, yeah, yeah, go for it. And so finally, we decided we would send one vehicle with those two drivers in it across, and we'd see what happened. And of course, if they got across, Keegan was going to have to come back because we weren't going to drive our vehicle ourselves, his mom and I. And so they took off and they managed to do a nice crossing. And then they turned around and crossed back again, which we found unbelievable. And then they asked, "You want us to do it again?" We're like, "No, no, no. We think we can make this crossing." And so again, the couple from Southern California was not with us. And now we just had two vehicles. Nathan was with us. And then Winslow and Jeffrey were in the other vehicle, and so it was just two vehicles, and we stuck together much more closely now that there were just two, because if something went wrong, you don't want to be by yourself, and and there were these signs that you should have somebody else. Not You should have at least two vehicles with you in case something does go wrong and you need to get yourself out of there. So that crossing was quite successful. That was probably the second. There was maybe one more that was significant water, which we got through fine. The rest didn't have that kind of water. Okay, these are basalt columns that you see along the shore, and they form when the lava flows down and cools and condenses, and then it splits in these columns. And these columns were formed 2 million years ago. And so again, you've got this fascination with the topography and the geography of the country, and you can see, the different ages going through. And I was really fascinated by this because of the colors, and they sort of reminded me of rust. And here you see the lighthouse at Marsvik. Again, I showed you a couple of lighthouses, I think. This one was quite different, quite straight up and down. And you can see, again, these basalt columns, and they're extending into the sea like organ pipes. And it was just really beautiful to look out over the water and look down from the lighthouse into the water. And then, as I said, these stone formations were really quite beautiful. And now we're starting, it's later in the day, we're starting to leave the peninsula. So these are just some photographs of things that we saw on that day. And this was the end of the day. Oddly enough, this is the only hotel, if you will, a guest house that I included. There's a reason this one is included. So this was in Brimslide, and it had, I think, as I recall, there were two buildings, and so some of us stayed in one building and some of us stayed in another building. And it was a quite beautiful area. I got up early the next morning and took some sunrise photos. It's just really calm and beautiful. But one of the really interesting things about this particular place is that there was an old abandoned farmhouse just like kind of across the road from where the guest house was. And I had seen the farmhouse and I had taken photos of it. And Edie, one of the other people in our group, texted me that evening and said, "Did you see the installation?" And I said, "No." And it was too late then to go out. Not that it was particularly dark. Yeah, I should mention that we during most of this trip, it was only dark for about an hour a day. So that was kind of interesting. But anyway, on the wall of this barn, if you will, there was this art installation. I mean, it's just written on the wall. It wasn't, it's like chalk, but it wasn't chalk. And it just says, I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive. I mean, it's just this expanse of doing it. And it was really startling. And I tried to find out, and I wasn't the only one, I tried to find out more about it. And the person who did that installation is Natalie Loughlin, who actually is a Canadian. And I think she's from Alberta. I think she lives in Alberta, and does installations at different places. But I could not find out why she had gone to Iceland, and gone to this particular town and put up this installation. I came across a small story of her that suggested that she'd had some traumatic experience and just wanted to forgive the person, or at least ease her mind somehow, and that this had something to do with it. But I can't tell you beyond that. Okay, day five. We're in the Northwest, and we're going to go to the Snuffleness transition. We're tra going to transition to the Stelvinus Peninsula. So this day, the driving is mostly paved. There were some side things to see, some cliffs and some seal colonies. It was a longer mileage day, but it's a low to moderate in terms of difficulty. And mostly it was more distance fatigue than technical challenge. Some of what we saw were some turf fortifications, some sea stacks, seals, some ford crossings, and the volcanic peninsula. So that day we did almost 207 miles. We were out for almost 9 hours, averaged 31 miles per hour. And you can see we're at a much lower elevation, so 19 to 771. So we've really come down back out of the mountains. So this is Borgarvirki, which is a citadel, a fort, and you've got these columns of basalt again, and then there's the volcanic plug. And so this is on the Vatnases Peninsula in northwest Iceland. It's about 10 to 15 meters high, and it's 177 meters above sea level. They think it might have been used as an old Viking fortress, or at least some legends claim it was, but we don't really know for sure what it was used for. And then there's more scenery as we're going along. So you can see out to the mountains in the far. And again, you've got all these different lava flows and rocks, and this is just a close-up of some of the rocks and the kind of ancient rock formations. And then this is the Hvitsker Sea Stack, which is sometimes referred to as the Troll of Northwest Iceland. And you can see it has two holes at the base, which gives it sort of the sense of a dragon drinking water from the sea. And then the base of this installation is reinforced with concrete so that it doesn't tip over. And so they believe that the sort of the legend is that a troll tried to destroy a nearby monastery and was turned into stone by the rising sun. And but they became worried that it would topple over, which is why it was reinforced. And because there were a lot of different legends in Iceland, but because it had this legend attached to it, they did want to keep it. They didn't want it to just kind of fall over and sink, so that's why it was reinforced. This is just a farmhouse that we saw along the way. Again, we're now along the coast, not up in the mountains, and so we see a different kind of scenery. And so more scenery leaving the Vatna's Peninsula, where you can see the water and rocks and mountains. Okay, day six, we do the Snæfellsnes Peninsula circuit and return to Reykjavik. And so we move from Hotel Boudier to Alda Hotel. That day, it's mostly just a coastal loop that we're doing. We're not on F roads, so it's scenic for sure, but manageable. And it's short stops, lots of viewpoints, and we're sort of back to city driving. And it's kind of our whole group. I mean, I'm sure that I think the drivers really had fun driving the routes that we did. And so when we kind of got back to urban areas, it wasn't as fun. You're back to stoplights and cars and stop signs and things like that. So it's not the same adventure, although you still get to see great things. So we've got a glacier capped volcano and sea cliffs and pebble beaches and craters in the fishing town, and then more of this lava fields that I showed you at the beginning of this trip that were in Grindavid. So this day, 206 miles, almost 9 hours again, speed of 31 miles per hour, and again, 1908 to about 771 was kind of the range of what we did. So I'll show you the picture of the church first, but I wanted to have some notes about the church. So it's called the Buddha Church or the Black Church. It's a small wooden church on the south side of this peninsula. The local church was established. The first one was in 1703, but the church that you're going to see was built in 1848. And it's also used as a traditional church, but also destination weddings and things like that. And so here are some photos of that church. And again, it looks out over the water. And it was really beautiful, I have to say. I was quite taken by it. Now, this is a port on the peninsula. And again, it was a lovely day. And you've got great colors and great shadows and great reflections of that. And then we have this bar statue. So it's located on the same Snæfellsnes Peninsula, and it's again a legend. And so the structure is made out of locally sourced stone and was designed to reflect a story. And Barber, who is represented, was said to be a half giant and half human, lived on this peninsula. However, he came from Norway. He didn't originate from Iceland, but came from Norway and brought his 9 daughters and several of his nephews. And they tried to take over some of the town. And then and not everybody felt comfortable with him. And then one of his nephews apparently knocked over one of his daughters, and she fell onto an iceberg and floated away. So he lost his daughter. So he picked up, this is the story, he picked up both of his nephews and carried them both together and dumped them into the ocean. So this is now memorialized as such. Again, it was interesting to see. This is the Ornarstapi cliff viewpoint. So again, we're looking over some cliffs. You can see this balsamite again, and you can see moss that's growing here. Just really rugged land, which is kind of interesting to see. And this is the volcano in that same area, and you can see the different colors of it. Okay, sorry, this is the wrong thing. We're now trying to get to the glacier, and so I'm just going to show you some things that we see on our way to the glacier. So this is a volcano, and again, you can see the green moss that's growing on the volcano. Some of the volcanic land, and these are the kinds of things that we were driving over. And we made a decision to go and see this particular glacier that day, and so it was a kind of a long trek to get there, actually. And then you can see some of the glacier here, and we walked down to the glacier, and we actually walked on the glacier. I was a little nervous about doing that, but in the end, I got my courage up and walked on the glacier and have the photo to prove it. And so that was really kind of interesting to do. Again, we saw people hiking in some of the different areas, but we didn't see anyone who was right around the glacier here at the time that we were there. And then this is the end of our trip. We're on end of the last day back going to Reykjavik, and we stopped to see one last shipwreck to get off the beaten highway once more. And we spent a couple of hours there, to be quite honest. There's lots to see. I'm just showing you this one boat, lots of rust and lots of interesting things. And it's quite an impressive boat. So that was how we pretty much decided to end our day. And so then I just want to say, so that was the end of our road trip. We got to Reykjavik. We all went out to dinner, said goodbye to each other, and then the next day, people started heading home, except for my two friends from Seattle and I. We stayed in Reykjavik overnight, I guess, and then we went to the Blue Lagoon, and we spent 2 days in the Blue Lagoon, and we spent 4 or 5 hours, probably, maybe more, walking around Grindavik, basically documenting all of the damage that had been done by the volcanic eruption that had happened in the fall of 2024. I mean, I have tons of pictures. I'm not going to talk about that in this presentation because what I wanted to do was sort of show you a part of Iceland that was off the beaten track, whereas these things would be things that lots of people would do if they went to Iceland. I will say that the Blue Lagoon was lovely, and being there at the time that we were, the sun barely ever really went down, and so lots of beautiful sunsets and sunrises. So just to kind of conclude a little bit here, and then I can take some questions. So if in terms of, do I want to do an F-roads trip or not? It was really great to do, but as I said, you have to have these four-wheel drive vehicles, and they're more expensive to rent, and of course more insurance. And then of course you're on those roads, so it's slower. You're exposed to some risk. We lost a vehicle. The roads are provisional. They may be open or not be open, but there are signs letting you know. Although one of the roads that we took was supposed to be open and there was no closed sign at the beginning of it. We went all the way to the end, and there at the end, there was a big sign for oncoming traffic that said that the road was impassable. And we all just laughed because, of course, we'd gone all the way without encountering any sign of that, and we didn't really have any trouble. And you just have to pay more attention. What you get to see is the interior solitude. You're not around people. All the geological formations and what's happening with the land. We did see one or two tour buses somewhere. I sort of remember that now, but we really hardly ever saw any people at all. But there's a downside in a way. It's not as convenient as so we had to plan our meals, not our dinners. We always had dinner planned already, but and usually breakfast was also part of where we stayed. But you had to kind of think about what you're going to do for lunch. You had to think about gas stops. And so it's not as predictable, and you do miss some of the coastal towns that the ring road covers. And so, who is this trip for? And first of all, you have to be comfortable with uncertainty. There were several times when we wondered if we might venture onto a road and actually just have to backtrack, that it would be impassable, or we would decide we just couldn't do that river and we'd have to go around. So you have to be open to what could happen. You have to be interested in geology because you're not going to see people. You can't really be on a schedule. I think several times, we had dinner planned for 7 o'clock, and a couple times I think we missed that. We didn't miss dinner, but we missed our 7 o'clock. And a couple times I remember just throwing any of my stuff into my room and running down for a quick happy hour and then dinner because can take longer, a lot longer than you think. You have to be physically steady, particularly if you're getting out of your vehicle all the time and walking around and doing things. And you do need to be a fairly conservative driver. Okay, that's my presentation.
So, Nancy, thank you very much. I see you've stopped sharing the screen. I'm just going to change the view here if I can get my cursor to the gallery view. Okay. Um, Quite an exciting type of trip. I visited Iceland, as you know, and spoke about it about a year before you. And I mean, this is totally different. Were the two drivers part of your group, or were they professional drivers provided by companies there?
They were us.
I see. Okay. That's even more scary for me. Thinking I'll open it up to other people to ask questions and comment.
Were these all people that you knew before, Nancy, or did you meet them there?
No, I had traveled with all of these people before. I've probably traveled with Jeffrey and Winslow 25 times. I've done other things with them. I've traveled with Keegan a few times, and I've traveled with Edie probably 5 or 6 times. So the couple from Southern California I had never traveled with, but they didn't really spend much time with us. It turned out not to be a trip that was suited for them, and so they really were doing the ring road most of the time, and we would meet up with them in the evening for dinner.
Yeah. Thanks.
Nancy, you commented that when the vehicle got stuck, you were able to phone for help, and that you were texting while you were driving. That seems to imply you had cell phone coverage pretty much everywhere. Was that the case?
That's a good question, Richard. We did not always have cell phone coverage, and in fact, the place where we lost the vehicle, with after you got up, you were up on a hill, and there was a picnic bench. But when Nathan tried to contact Hertz, he didn't have enough signal, and so Jeffrey took Nathan, drove him away while we stayed at the picnic bench to where he could get signal. So they had to drive like about 15 minutes to get signal. They then tried to text us to say, just come. But we couldn't get the signal. So no, we didn't have, we did not have signals all the time. That's a good question.
So
We had a lot
satellite
of,
phone would be a good idea, it sounds.
well, particularly if you're by yourself or just one vehicle. Yes, absolutely.
So one other comment, you sometimes see vehicles with what people refer to as a snorkel, which is an air intake that goes up to roof height. And I kind of used to look at these and think, well, who's going to drive their car through a river up to the windshield? But what they're really for is to stop water splashing into the engine air intake, because if
And
it gets in there, it's uncompressible and your engine is toast.
that's
So I,
yeah, that's what happened. So the two Land Rovers did have those snorkels, and so and we never. I would say we got halfway up the grill. That's the deepest that we got. We certainly didn't go under. The smaller vehicle, the Bigster, that did not have snorkels. And what was unfortunate about that was we were advised what kind of vehicle to get, which was a Land Rover. And Keegan had done research for our group and I guess passed on some of the information. And we used a local rental company. Nathan used Hertz, and he had tried to reserve a Land Rover. And Hertz said, I guess when he showed up, they said, well, we don't really have any Land Rovers, but we have this other vehicle and it's just as good. And not knowing any better and not really having any options, he trusted them, and it clearly was not just as good. Now, I will say, we did not hide from the vehicle rental places what we were doing. They do ask you if you're going to be on F roads because it's a different kind of insurance and things. And we were completely honest that we were going to be on F roads, so it wasn't like a surprise.
yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Paul?
Hi, Nancy. Thanks again for interesting talk. This is off the side of your presentation, but you mentioned once or twice seeing farms. Where were the animals? What animals were there?
Um, I'm trying to think if the animal that's most eaten there is lamb. So that's, I mean, it's mostly lamb. We had a lot of seafood because we were on the coast some, but um, most of the meat, I'm a pescatarian, so not all into the meat part, but most of the meat that we saw was lamb. I can't say that I remember seeing lambs out wandering about. Maybe one day, but yes, that's what it would be.
I, I
Hi,
think,
Nancy. Did you see any horses? I drove the road where they saw lots of horses.
yeah.
We saw a ton, just once, but it was a ton of horses,
Right.
and they were corralling them. They had brought them down the road. They were corralling them, and what we gathered was these were horses that were used for tourists. Although there weren't any tourists right where we were, we got out of our vehicles to check out what was going on. And so they moved the horses from place to place from time to time. Those are the only kind of horses that we saw, and they were really small. I mean, compared to what you're used to.
So,
Nancy, Paul, I have a question.
yes,
The second. Thank you, Nancy, for a great presentation. This is Vijay here. I just wanted to ask you, how would a vegetarian person do there? Can you?
How would a
If you're vegetarian, can you get some things?
I had no problems with the vegetarian side. They had really lovely, beautiful vegetables, amazingly beautiful vegetables. And so the the only place where I had an issue was one day the group wanted to stop and get hot dogs because apparently Iceland's famous for hot dogs. I never liked hot dogs when I ate meat, and I haven't eaten meat for 30 some years. But I managed, I got some fries and something. I mean, was every day nutritious? Most days were nutritious. That day, they all wanted hot dogs. I had French fries. Like, that's okay.
So you're vegetarian?
Yeah, pescatarian.
Okay, good.
so a couple of things I could comment, Nancy. We traveled not on any F roads when I was there. We traveled on proper the ring road mainly. But then you see lots of animals. You see the farms. You see there are many sheep. There are many cows. There are horses. There are Shetland ponies or the ponies that they have, Icelandic ponies, I think. You'll see all of these things on those roads because it's where the people live. The road is there. I'm sure it wasn't there for the tourists, although the tourists use it. It's there for the local people to be able to drive from one place to the other, and their farms are located next to the roads. And in Iceland, they grow a lot of their own vegetables, even though it's colder than many places, because they have so much electricity that they get geothermal power, that they have these massive greenhouses that are heated by geothermal power, and they grow vegetables all year round. So it's readily available. They're not cheap, but they're readily available.
The food was expensive. I remember my watch. My bank sends me notices every time my credit card is used, tells me how much money I just spent 2 minutes ago. And one day we stopped for lunch, and I was really like I didn't want whatever budget I had, I wasn't trying to spend it all on food, that's for sure. But we stopped for lunch one day, and I got a bowl of chowder and a mug of beer, and it was $90 Canadian for that. And it wasn't uncommon for dinner, which would usually be an appetizer and a main. Most of us never really got dessert. Appetizer, main, and half a bottle of wine, and that was easily $150, easily. And I didn't try to pick the most expensive thing off the menu. I did try to pick lower things, but it was expensive, definitely expensive.
I can't see everyone because there's so many people here. I can't see everyone on one screen. So please chip in and just talk because I can't pick on you necessarily. I may not see your hand up. Okay, I don't see
Yeah.
anybody else on the other screen.
Nancy, again, thanks for a great talk. We drove right around Iceland on the ring road. It was some years ago, but your desire to be away from people would have been met probably half the time.
Yeah.
Or a few gravel roads thrown in, so get that experience.
Right.
And it seems like, it's another way to do it. It had nothing like the isolation that you were able to encounter, but even in the tourist places, it was not. It wasn't the Grand Canyon by any means.
Yeah, and I'm not saying one is better than the other. I really don't think that. This was
Mhm.
quite the adventure. Some in our group want to do now the east side. Would I do the east side? I don't know. I'm just gonna say I don't know. And it's not because anything. I mean, it's a great trip. It was a fantastic trip. But do I want to do that kind of road trip again? I'm not sure.
Can I
So
just pop in here?
Nancy, did you get to see any museums or art galleries?
Um, we spent a, we saw one or two galleries in Reykjavik after the road trip ended and most people went home. We were still around, and so we spent some time. We did go to the church in Reykjavik and got to the top of it and saw things like that. But we didn't do much of that kind of thing. We did spend a day in Reykjavik, just wandering around, seeing the opera hall and things like that.
Okay. Well, again, Nancy, thank you very much. I'm sure that after you got back home, you needed a bit of a vacation. And next month, I'll be presenting, and let me look at the date. It's March the 19th. So I'm going to talk to you about a much calmer trip than Nancy just talked to you about. I'm going to start you off in Prague. Then we're going to drive down to Passau and go along the Danube until we reach Budapest with a variety of stops along the way. It was a phenomenal trip, and I hope that many of you will join me while I share with you what we saw and did on that trip. So again, Nancy, thank you very much. And thanks to all the participants. This has been very well attended today, about almost 50 people who've attended.
Thanks, all of you as well.
Thanks.